Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business News Afternoon Report for Friday, the 20th of October, 2023. I'm Sean Aylmer. Every afternoon, we've got the 5 stories that happened today that you need to know about. Story number 1. It was a second tough day for the market, with the S&P ASX falling 1.2% by the close to 6,901 points. Like yesterday, it reflected fears about what's going on in the Middle East and what that means for oil prices and the global economy. Red ink everywhere. The big iron ore miners tumbled. The 4 major banks and Macquarie also fell by around 1% or more. CSL, Wesfarmers, Goodman, Telstra, QBE, Newcrest, they all got sold down. The energy giants, particularly Santos, outperformed, not really surprising given they benefit from higher oil prices. Over the night in the US and elsewhere, bond yields rose, putting pressure on equities. In fact, the US 10-year Treasury touched 5% for the first time since 2007. Now, yields fell slightly later after Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell gave a speech, which market watchers interpreted as saying no more rate rises for the time being. The strong price of gold and weak Aussie dollar, the Aussie's trading at around 63 US cents, have combined to push the price of gold measured in Aussie dollars to a record high of $3,138 an ounce. Now, in US dollars, which is how we normally measure it, gold's trading around 1986 US dollars an ounce. Story number 2, Sydney and Melbourne will need to build at least another 1.3 million homes to accommodate an extra 3 million residents over the next 18 years, with warnings many people will live up to 80 kilometres from the central business district. Forecasts from demographic and residential development company Informed Decisions, released today, show the current pressures on the nation's housing and rental markets will only grow, with the nation's population on track to swell by 7.4 million, that's 7.4 million extra people, by 2041, according to a report in the Sydney Morning Herald. 2/3 of those extra people, or almost 5 million, are expected to live in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane or Perth, as the COVID-era trend of capital city residents moving to rural and regional centres comes to an end. The Albanese government is under pressure to deal with soaring population growth, as the country added about 560,000 people in the 12 months to the end of March. Now, a lot of those were international students, of course. This is going to be an ongoing issue. Story number 3, you thought Qantas was an expensive airline to use? Well, airfares on the national carrier are only going to get more expensive. Qantas says it has no choice but to increase airfares in response to rising fuel costs, with domestic and international ticket prices to jump by about 3.5% from next week. An airline spokesperson told The Australian that Qantas and Jetstar had absorbed recent fuel hikes, but given the current tensions in the Middle East and broader economic factors, including a weaker Australian dollar, the price of fuel is expected to stay elevated for some time. The changes will apply to bookings made from October 27, meaning customers could beat the increase by buying airline seats before then. Story number 4, lithium developer Liontown's share price tumbled more than 30% today after it recommenced trading following the decision by US giant Albemarle to drop its bid for the Western Australian hopeful. Gina Reinhardt built a near 20% stake in the group, effectively blocking Albemarle's bid. The company was working on how to finance its Kathleen Valley mine in central WA, came up with a deal, $760 million in debt, and the issue of 420 million shares at a discounted price. That'll certainly get the share price under pressure, so to the idea that you don't have a bidder anymore. And finally, story number 5, President Joe Biden today directly appealed to the American people to support funding for Israel and Ukraine's war efforts, warning that Hamas and Russian President Vladimir Putin pose parallel threats to US democracy. The roughly 15-minute Oval Office address, just the second of Biden's tenure, precedes a formal White House request that Congress provide around $100 billion in resources for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and the US southern border. Biden argued that supporting Ukraine and Israel in their fights against Russia and militant groups, respectively, is vital for America's national security. Biden faces geopolitical challenges in the form of 2 major wars breaking out within 2 years, threatening global stability, just as he enters the 2024 presidential election, which will be bruising, and in all likelihood, his opponent's foreign policy will be in direct contrast to his. And before we leave that story, on the ground this morning, a US Navy warship shot down missiles appearing to head towards Israel, and American bases in Iraq and Syria were repeatedly targeted by drone attacks. Locally, pro-Palestinian marches are expected in the capital cities this weekend. That's it for the afternoon report for Friday, the 20th of October, 2023. Michael Thompson, Adam Lang and I We'll be back tomorrow morning with a weekend edition of Fear and Greed Business News. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your evening.